Imagine coming home from a long day at work. You pull into your driveway. Same house you've lived in for 3 months. Same neighborhood. Same Florida sunset, but something is different. There's an envelope taped to your front door, not in your mailbox. Not delivered by the postal service. Just, taped there, you open it. First page, notice of intent to lien. Amount due, $4,032.12 for garbage cans that weren't hidden. Standing water you didn't cause. Bushes that grew half an inch too tall. A Ring doorbell you installed for safety, the HOA wants $4,000, or they're taking your house. Most people would panic. Most people would pay. Most people would just give up, but Mark read the fine print. And what he found buried in Article 9 of the HOA's own bylaws would become the weapon that burned their entire operation to the ground. This is the story of how one man, $350 worth of certified mail, and 2 vacation days took down a corrupt HOA board, without ever setting foot in a courtroom. Let me take you to Florida. Not the Florida you see in vacation photos. Not the beaches. Not Disney World. This is inland Florida, the part where developers buy up cheap swampland, drain it, and build thousands of identical houses in a matter of months. Palm Coast. A city that barely existed 40 years ago, now one of the fastest growing areas in the state. And in one particular neighborhood, let's call it Whispering Pines Estates, a story was about to unfold that would become legend on Reddit's r/malicious compliance. Our protagonist, Mark, is a regular guy. Works in logistics. Mid-30s. Single. Just wanted a nice house with a yard. Something he could call his own after years of renting that he found Whispering Pines Estates in early 2026. Brand new construction. Energy efficient. Open floor plan. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2-car garage. The American dream on a quarter-acre lot. Price tag, $385,000. At closing, they give you a mountain of paperwork. Mortgage documents. Title insurance. Property tax disclosures. And somewhere in that stack, usually toward the bottom, the HOA documents, the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. 47 pages of rules about what you can and cannot do with your own property. Mark skimmed them. Like most people do. Garbage cans behind the fence. No RVs in the driveway. Standard stuff. Nothing that seemed unreasonable. He signed where they told him to sign and got his keys, but here's what they didn't give him at closing: the bylaws. A completely separate document. 29 pages that describe how the HOA actually operates. How board members are elected. How meetings are conducted. How violations must be communicated. And most importantly, how homeowners can fight back. It wasn't even in an envelope. Just a thick packet, wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve, taped to his front door with packing tape that left residue on the paint. Classy. Mark peeled it off and brought it inside. Sat down at his kitchen table. Started reading. And within 3 minutes, his hands were shaking. The HOA, an entity he'd barely thought about since closing, was claiming he owed them $4,032.12. Let me read you the actual list of violations, exactly as they appeared. Violation number 1, garbage receptacles. Homeowners' garbage and recycling containers were observed to be in public view on June 12, 2026. In violation of CC&R Section 4.2a. Fine, $100. Mark's garbage cans were on the side of his house. Behind a small fence. Exactly where the builder had installed the concrete pad for them. Exactly like every other house on the street. Violation number 2, standing water. Standing water was observed between lots 47 and 48 on June 15, 2026, presenting a potential health hazard. Homeowner is responsible for remediation. Fine, $250. This was a grading problem. The land between Mark's house and his neighbor's sloped inward, creating a natural basin. Every time it rained, water pooled there. This was a construction defect, something the developer was supposed to fix before anyone moved in. Violation number 3, vehicle parking. A vehicle was observed parked over the sidewalk line in the driveway on June 18, 2026, obstructing pedestrian passage. Fine, $100. Mark drove a Ford F-150. It's a truck. It barely fits in a standard driveway. Violation number 4, inadequate landscaping. Bushes along the front foundation were observed to be untrimmed and exceeding the maximum allowable height of 30 inches on June 20, 2026. Fine, $150. The bushes had been planted 2 months earlier. They were barely established. Trimming them would have killed them. Violation number 5, unapproved exterior modification. An unapproved doorbell camera device was observed installed adjacent to the front entry door on June 22, 2026. Fine, $200. A Ring doorbell. For security. In 2026. But the violations themselves, absurd as they were, weren't the worst part. The worst part was the timeline. These violations span 9 weeks. From mid-April to mid-June. 9 weeks of supposed infractions, and Mark had never received a single notice about any of them, not one letter. Not one email. Not one phone call. Not one knock on the door from a neighbor on the board. The first time Mark learned that any of this existed was this packet, this lien threat, demanding over $4,000 with a 30-day deadline that he read the fine print at the bottom. Failure to remit payment within 30 calendar days will result in the filing of a formal lien against the property, which may result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. 4 garbage cans. Standing water. A doorbell. And some bushes. Mark took a deep breath. He was angry, but he was also smart. He knew that responding in anger would get him nowhere. So he sat down at his computer and typed a carefully worded email to the HOA management company that he laid out the basic facts. He'd never received any prior notices. Several of the violations were construction defects the developer was already aware of. The doorbell was a safety device. He requested copies of all prior violation notices, photographic evidence, and a hearing to dispute the charges. Professional. Reasonable. The kind of email that any rational organization would respond to. He hit send. And waited. 3 days passed. No response. Mark sent a follow-up. This time, he CC'd the HOA board president directly, a guy named Richard who lived 3 streets over and drove a Lexus that he washed every Saturday morning. 5 days. Still nothing. Mark sent a third email. The tone shifted. Still professional, but the words legal counsel appeared for the first time. He mentioned Florida Statute 720, the Homeowners Association Act, and the requirement that HOAs provide access to official records upon request, and finally, on day 8, a response arrived, not from Richard. Not from the management company's director. From someone named Deborah with a title that read, Compliance Coordinator. And the email said, and I am quoting this exactly as it appeared. Dear Mr. Redacted. Per the association's governing documents, all communications regarding covenant violations will only be addressed via communication methods approved in the bylaws. Regards. Deborah. Compliance Coordinator. Whispering Pines Estates HOA. That was it. 3 sentences. No phone number. No offer to help. No acknowledgement of any of his questions. Just a bureaucratic wall. Mark stared at the screen. He didn't have the bylaws. They never gave him the bylaws. So he responded, still trying to be reasonable, I understand. I was not provided a copy of the bylaws at closing. Can you please send me a copy so I can follow the proper procedure? Deborah's response arrived within hours. Dear Mr. Redacted. Requests for governing documents including bylaws must be submitted via communications methods approved in the bylaws, per the bylaws. Regards. Deborah. Read that again. To request the bylaws, you need to follow the communication procedures outlined in the bylaws, which you can only know if you already have the bylaws. It was a perfect bureaucratic trap. An infinite loop designed to exhaust and frustrate homeowners into just giving up and paying, and the worst part. This was by design. The board had deliberately structured their communication policies this way. They knew most homeowners would hit this wall, get frustrated, and either pay the fine or hire a lawyer, which most people can't afford. What they didn't know was that Mark had been fighting a completely different battle that was about to hand him the keys to the kingdom. Remember violation number 2? The standing water. That was actually a real problem, just not one Mark had caused. The land between his house and the neighbors sloped inward. Every time it rained, water collected in a 6-inch deep pool that stretched 20 feet. It bred mosquitoes. It killed the grass. During heavy storms, it crept toward both houses' foundations. Mark had been fighting with the developer about this since the week he moved in. Multiple calls. Multiple emails. Multiple promises of, "we'll send someone out," that never materialized. But here's the thing about fighting with developers: you accumulate information. Contact names. Email addresses. Direct phone numbers. The internal structure of the company. You learn who can actually make things happen and who's just a gatekeeper, and Mark had learned something crucial. The developer, a company called Coastal Florida Communities LLC, had been involved in 3 class action lawsuits in the past 5 years. All related to construction defects. All settled out of court. One night, frustrated by Deborah's circular emails and unable to sleep, Mark started researching. Deep researching. The kind of late-night internet rabbit hole where one link leads to another and suddenly it's 2 a.m. and you've read 17 pages of Florida property law, and that's when he found it. Florida Statute 720.303, the part of the Homeowners Association Act that governs official records. It says, and this is the key, the developer is responsible for creating the initial governing documents. The CC and RS. The Articles of Incorporation. And the bylaws. The developer writes everything, files it with the state, and then hands it over to the HOA board. Once enough homes are sold, the developer has a copy of the bylaws. By law. They drafted them in the first place. Mark already had a direct email address for the developer's regional project manager, a guy named Tom who had been stringing him along about the grading issue for weeks. At 7:32 a.m. the next morning, Mark sent an email with the subject line, Grading issue update plus urgent request. The email was a masterpiece of strategic positioning. It referenced the ongoing grading dispute. It mentioned Florida Statute 720. It implied, without explicitly threatening, that Mark was consulting with legal resources regarding multiple unresolved matters related to the property. And then the request, as a courtesy while we work toward resolving these matters, could you please provide a complete copy of all HOA governing documents originally drafted by Coastal Florida Communities LLC for Whispering Pines Estates, including but not limited to the bylaws? The response came back in 47 minutes. Tom, clearly wanting to avoid any escalation that might trigger another lawsuit, sent Mark the complete PDF. All 29 pages. The full, unredacted bylaws of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association. Mark downloaded them. Made a backup. Made a backup of the backup. And then, with a fresh cup of coffee, he started reading, page by page. Article by article. Subsection by subsection, and on page 16, in Article 9, Communications, he found it, the atomic bomb. Let me read you what Article 9 actually said. Verbatim. From the document the board themselves wrote and filed. Article 9, Communications. Section 9.1, Method of Delivery. All violation notices, hearing notices, fine assessments, and official communications from the association to any homeowner shall be delivered via United States Postal Service certified mail, return receipt requested. Electronic communication including email shall not constitute official notice for purposes of covenant enforcement. Section 9.2, Separate Notices. Each individual violation shall be addressed in a separate communication. Each subsequent notice regarding the same violation, including but not limited to notices of continued violation, notices of failure to cure, notices of fine assessment, and notices of hearing, shall constitute separate communications requiring separate delivery. Read that again carefully. Let it sink in. Every single violation requires a separate certified letter, not one packet taped to a door. Not one email. Not even one certified letter listing everything, each violation, separate. Each follow-up, separate. Each late fee, separate. Each notice of hearing, separate. Mark grabbed a notepad and started doing math. His packet listed 8 unique violations. But several of them had repeat violation notations, meaning the HOA claimed they'd sent multiple notices over that 9-week period. A first notice. A follow-up. A notice of fine assessment. A notice of hearing. Conservatively, Mark counted at least 22 separate notices that should have been generated for his property alone. At roughly $7.35 per certified letter with return receipt, the current USPS rate, the HOA should have spent approximately $161.70 just on postage for his case. But here's what was even more important: not one of those 22 notices had ever been sent. Mark had never received certified mail from the HOA. Not once. No signature on file. No delivery confirmation. No return receipt. Under their own bylaws, the rules they wrote, every single violation was procedurally invalid, and the best part: Article 9 was buried deep in the bylaws. The board had clearly forgotten they'd even written it. They'd gotten so comfortable with their taped to the door intimidation tactics that they'd completely abandoned their own legally binding procedures. Mark had 2 choices now: option A, send a single letter pointing out the procedural violations, demand the liens be dropped, and move on with his life; option B, use the board's own rules to systematically destroy their enforcement apparatus. Mark took 2 vacation days from work. He called them personal business days. And then he started building his trap. The letter Mark handed out was brilliant in its simplicity. It didn't attack anyone. It didn't make accusations. It just stated facts. The HOA's bylaws require all official communications to be sent via certified mail. If you've received violations by regular mail, email, or on your door, those violations are procedurally invalid. You have the right to request a copy of the bylaws, but the board will play games. Here's the HOA board's mailing address. Here's the exact language to use in your request. And here's the important part: their response also has to be sent certified. Visual prompt 20, multiple hand stuffing envelopes. Different houses, different kitchens, same action. A montage of preparation, printers running, envelopes being addressed, stamps being applied. The scale growing, 10 envelopes, 30, 60, 100 plus. The letter also included a brilliant tactical detail that Mark had figured out from his research. The bylaws were 29 pages. That's a heavy envelope. That requires extra postage. If 100 households each requested a copy, the HOA had to print, package, and send 129-page booklets via certified mail. Do the math: 29 pages printed 100 times is 2,900 pages. At certified mail rates with the weight surcharge, each mailing would cost roughly $9 to $12. 100 requests. That's potentially $900 to $1,200 just to fulfill bylaw copy requests, and that was just the appetizer. Mark told the neighbors about his own $4,032 lien threat. He told them about the 9 weeks of violations he'd never been notified about. He told them about Deborah's circular emails, visual prompt 21, a living room, evening. Several neighbors' gaffe. The letter also included a brilliant tactical detail that Mark had figured out from his research. The bylaws were 29 pages. That's a heavy envelope. That requires extra postage. If 100 households each requested a copy, the HOA had to print, package, and send 129-page booklets via certified mail.do. The math, 29 pages printed 100 times is 2,900 pages. At certified mail rates with the weight surcharge, each mailing would cost roughly $9 to $12. 100 requests. That's potentially $900 to $1,200 just to fulfill bylaw copy requests, and that was just the appetizer. Mark told the neighbors about his own $4,032 lien threat. He told them about the 9 weeks of violations he'd never been notified about. He told them about Deborah's circular emails. That evening, about 10 neighbors gathered at Mark's house. And that's when the truth started coming out. The couple with the golden retriever. They'd been fined $350 for a barking dog 3 times in 2 months, based on reports from an anonymous neighbor. They'd paid it. They'd been too scared not to. The retired teacher. She'd been fined $200 for having a bird feeder that allegedly attracted pest wildlife. Squirrels. She was fined for squirrels, the family with twins. They'd been fined $500 for putting up a temporary shade canopy during their kid's birthday party. It was up for 4 hours, and one neighbor, a woman named Sandra who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac, shared the most disturbing story of all. Sandra's husband used a wheelchair. They'd installed a ramp at their front entrance, a beautiful, professionally built ramp with railings and non-slip surface. They'd submitted the plans to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. They'd gotten written approval. And then, 3 months after installation, they'd received a $3,500 fine for unauthorized exterior modification. When they showed the board their approval letter, signed by the same committee chairman, the board claimed the approval was for a different ramp design and declared the fine would stand that they'd been fighting it for 6 months. They'd spent $2,800 on a lawyer. And it was still unresolved. Mark looked around the room. 10 neighbors. 10 families who'd been bullied, fined, and threatened by their own HOA. That he held up the bylaws and read Article 9 aloud. The room went silent. Then someone laughed, a short, bitter laugh of disbelief. Then someone else said, "Wait, everything they did to us, none of it was legal." And that's when the plan went from defense to offense. Monday morning. Mark's first vacation day, his kitchen table disappeared under a mountain of supplies. A ream of paper, 500 sheets, sat next to the printer. Boxes of number 10 envelopes. A roll of certified mail stickers. A stack of return receipt green cards. A postal scale he'd bought at Office Depot the night before. This was going to take precision and patience that he started with himself. For each of the 22 violation notices the HOA claimed to have sent, plus the lien threat itself, he drafted a separate letter. 23 letters total. The template was precise. Paragraph 1, referenced the specific violation by date and description. Paragraph 2, formally refute the violation with specific evidence. For the garbage cans, the receptacles are stored on the side yard concrete pad installed by the developer for this purpose, behind a privacy fence, in compliance with CCNR Section 4.2a, which requires only that receptacles be screened from street view. Paragraph 3, cite Article 9 of the bylaws and formally request a copy of the certified mail receipt with delivery confirmation for the original violation notice. Paragraph 4, note that under Florida Statute 720.303, official records must be produced within 10 business days of a written request. Paragraph 5. State that failure to produce the requested records within the statutory timeframe constitutes a rebuttable presumption that the records do not exist, and by extension, that the violation notice was never lawfully delivered. Paragraph 6. Formally reserve all rights to pursue further legal remedies. That he customized each letter. The garbage cans letter referenced the specific location of the concrete pad. The standing water letter cited his months-long correspondence with the developer. The Ring doorbell letter included a printout of Florida case law about security devices and reasonable accommodations. 23 letters. Each one specific. Each one devastating if challenged. Then he addressed the envelopes. Applied the certified mail stickers, the green and white ones with the barcode and tracking number. Attached the return receipt cards, the little green postcards the recipient has to sign that he took photos of every tracking number. Made a spreadsheet with all 23 barcode numbers. Created a folder with copies of every letter, and then, on Tuesday afternoon, his second vacation day, he drove to the post office. There's something satisfying about handing a stack of 23 certified letters to a postal clerk. The look on their face. The way they have to process each one individually, scan the barcode, weigh it, calculate the postage, print the receipt. At roughly $7.35 each with return receipt, the total came to about $169. Plus tax. Plus the envelopes, the paper, the printer ink. Mark's total investment, roughly $350 and 2 vacation days that he kept every receipt. He scanned every tracking slip. He added all 23 tracking numbers to his spreadsheet and set up USPS tracking alerts for all of them, then he went home. And he waited, but he wasn't done. Because Mark had also told his neighbors exactly what to do. Over the next week, quietly, without coordination, letters started flowing into the HOA's mailbox. Requests for bylaws. Requests for violation records. Requests for financial statements. All sent certified. All with return receipt. All citing Article 9 of the HOA's own bylaws. Roughly 100 homes in the neighborhood, out of 150 total, sent at least one certified letter requesting the bylaws. Some sent more. Some sent requests for their own violation records. Some sent requests for the HOA's complete financial statements for the past 3 years. The math became staggering. At 100 requests for the 29-page bylaws, with certified postage and weight surcharges of roughly $9 to $12 per mailing, the HOA was looking at potentially $900 to $1,200 just to fulfill bylaw copy requests, but that was the least of their problems. Because each request carried a 10-business-day legal deadline. And each request required a separate certified mail response. And Article 9 of the bylaws meant they couldn't just email PDFs or drop copies on doorsteps, they had to send physical, certified, return receipt packages. To 100-plus homes. Within 10 business days, the postal costs alone would drain thousands from the HOA's operating budget, and the clock was ticking. Here's what we know happened next, pieced together from a neighbor whose sister-in-law worked at the HOA management company, and from documents that later became public. The first wave of certified letters hit on a Wednesday. By Friday, the management company had received over 40 requests for bylaws. By the following Tuesday, that number had climbed past 80. Deborah, the compliance coordinator who had sent Mark those smug, circular emails, reportedly had a meeting with the board that did not go well. The board's immediate reaction was panic. Followed by anger. Followed by a desperate attempt to find a way around their own rules, the board held an emergency meeting. Closed to homeowners, of course. The minutes of that meeting, which Mark later obtained through a formal records request, revealed the depth of their panic. They discussed whether they could simply amend the bylaws to remove the certified mail requirement. Their lawyer, who was billing the HOA $350 an hour, informed them that bylaw amendments required 30 days notice and a membership vote. Even if they started immediately, it would take months. They discussed whether they could just ignore the requests and deal with the consequences. Their lawyer informed them that Florida Statute 720 carried penalties of up to $500 per 6. In short, they were trapped. By their own rules. By their own bylaws. By their own state laws, and the clock was ticking. The 10 business days came and went. Mark received no certified mail responses. No bylaw copies. No violation records. No hearing notices. Nothing. Neither did any of his neighbors. The HOA had apparently decided, against their lawyer's advice, to simply not respond. Perhaps they thought the homeowners would give up. Perhaps they thought the costs of compliance were worse than the costs of non-compliance. Perhaps they simply panicked and froze. Whatever the reason, the statutory deadline passed. And with it, a legal presumption took effect. The requested records did not exist, which meant, under Florida law, that the violations themselves were unenforceable. So Mark sent 23 more certified letters. This time, each one contained the following: confirmation that the statutory deadline for producing records had passed. Citation of Florida Statute 720.303(5), regarding the rebuttable presumption. Formal notice that all violations were contested as procedurally invalid. Demand for immediate written confirmation that all fines, liens, and violation records had been cancelled. Notice that failure to respond within 15 days would result in the filing of a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. A not-so-subtle mention of Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. These letters were no longer defensive. They were offensive. Mark wasn't asking for fairness anymore. He was demanding it, and he wasn't the only one. The neighborhood had woken up. Sandra's lawyer, the one she'd already paid $2,800, filed a formal demand letter on her behalf, citing the HOA's failure to produce records. The couple with the golden retriever requested a complete audit of all fines assessed against their property. The retired teacher joined a Facebook group for Florida HOA reform and started sharing her story. The family with twins contacted the county building department about the HOA's architectural review practices. One man's fight had become a neighborhood movement. The next regularly scheduled HOA board meeting was, by law, open to all members. Usually, maybe 5 or 6 people showed up. This time, the room was packed, standing room only. Over 100 homeowners crowded into the community center's main hall. Many were holding folders, copies of their certified mail receipts, their violation notices, their demand letters. The energy in the room was electric. Richard, the board president, tried to follow the standard agenda. Call to order. Minutes from the previous meeting. Old business. That he didn't make it past old business. One by one, homeowners stood up and demanded answers. Sandra went first. She held up her approved ramp plans, signed by the board's own architectural committee chairman. Why was I fined $3,500 for a modification that was approved in writing? And why hasn't anyone responded to my certified mail request for an explanation? The board chairman, the same man who had signed Sandra's approval, stared at the table. He didn't answer. The couple with the golden retriever stood up next. We paid $1,050 in fines for our dog barking. We've requested the complaint records 3 times, via certified mail, as required by your bylaws. Nothing. Where are the records? No answer. Mark's Reddit post, the one I've been telling you about, went viral in the r/malicious compliance community. 5,887 upvotes. Thousands of comments. News outlets picked it up. Other HOA victims reached out, asking for advice. Somewhere in Florida, in some suburban post office, the legend lives on. Postal workers still talk about the neighborhood that sent thousands of certified letters in a single month. The management company, the one that employed Deborah, reportedly updated their contracts to exclude neighborhoods with excessive certified mail requirements. And Mark? He bought a new house. In a neighborhood without an HOA. His one piece of advice for anyone buying a home: get the bylaws before you close. And if they won't give them to you, send a certified letter. Here's what this story teaches us, and it's a lesson that applies far beyond HOAs. Bullies count on you not knowing the rules. They count on you being too busy, too tired, too intimidated to fight back. They write the rules to benefit themselves, and they hide the parts that protect you. But here's the thing about rules: they cut both ways. If you take the time to read them, really read them, you'll find that the same rules designed to trap you can also be used to trap the people who wrote them. Mark spent $350. 2 vacation days. And he read 29 pages of bylaws that the board assumed no one would ever read. That was his superpower. Not money. Not lawyers. Not connections. Just patience. And certified mail. If you want more HOA justice stories, subscribe and hit that bell. We release new stories every week, each one more satisfying than the last. Drop a comment telling me What's the worst HOA rule you've ever seen enforced? I read every single one. And if you're fighting your own HOA battle right now, send it certified. Mark's Reddit post, the one I've been telling you about, went viral in the r/malicious compliance community. 5,887 upvotes. Thousands of comments. News outlets picked it up. Other HOA victims reached out, asking for advice. Somewhere in Florida, in some suburban post office, the legend lives on. Postal workers still talk about the neighborhood that sent thousands of certified letters in a single month. The management company, the one that employed Deborah, reportedly updated their contracts to exclude neighborhoods with excessive certified mail requirements. And Mark? He bought a new house. In a neighborhood without an HOA. His one piece of advice for anyone buying a home: get the bylaws before you close. And if they won't give them to you, send a certified letter. Here's what this story teaches us, and it's a lesson that applies far beyond HOAs. Bullies count on you not knowing the rules. They count on you being too busy, too tired, too intimidated to fight back. They write the rules to benefit themselves, and they hide the parts that protect you. But here's the thing about rules: they cut both ways. If you take the time to read them, really read them, you'll find that the same rules designed to trap you can also be used to trap the people who wrote them. Mark spent $350. 2 vacation days. And he read 29 pages of bylaws that the board assumed no one would ever read. That was his superpower. Not money. Not lawyers. Not connections. Just patience. And certified mail. If you want more HOA justice stories, subscribe and hit that bell. We release new stories every week, each one more satisfying than the last. Drop a comment telling me, what's the worst HOA rule you've ever seen enforced? I read every single one. And if you're fighting your own HOA battle right now, send it certified.